Hello everyone, welcome to this session of Covidence, Developing Search Strategies. My name is Laura Meller and I'm a Community Manager at Covidence. I'm based in the UK. I'm joined today by my colleague Ghida Iskandarani and by our guest speaker Nia Roberts from the University of Oxford. I'll give a brief introduction to the three of us. My background is in academic publishing. I've supported the editorial team of the Cochrane Handbook and I write for the Covidence blog. Ghida Iskandarani is a community manager at Covidence with a background in nursing and experience in evidence-based healthcare research. Nia Roberts has worked in healthcare libraries for over 20 years and for most of that time has been involved in systematic reviews. As a senior outreach librarian for the Bodleian Health Care Libraries, she collaborates with researchers and students in the departments of Population Health and Primary Care, University of Oxford. This involves being part of systematic review teams as the information specialist, designing, running, and reporting the searches. In addition, she provides training and one-to-one support for those new to the world of evidence synthesis. So that's a quick introduction to us. So before the main section of the webinar begins, I'll just give a little bit of information for you about Covidence. Covidence's mission is to change the way the world creates and uses trustworthy knowledge. It was created by and for the research community and is designed to streamline the review process from title and abstract screening through to extraction and risk of bias. Covidence's journey begins with importing citations or references. Searching for this has to be done outside of Covidence. So we want to ensure that you're able to develop strong search strategies, optimize your included studies, so that the focus of our session today is going to be how to develop your search strategies. So I'll just take us through what we're going to cover today, what Nia is going to talk about. We're going to, first of all, cover systematic reviews, search guidance and process. Then Nia is going to talk about scoping your search and developing your research question. Then there'll be designing and developing both for an intervention review question and for a risk question. And then Nia's going to talk about searching grey literature and snowballing of references. So that's what we've got planned. So on that, I'll hand over to Nia, making you the presenter now, so that you can talk us through the rest of the slides. Thanks, Nia.
Thank you for that introduction. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. So this is what we're going to talk about today in a very brief way. So we're going to cover the search process, looking at, searching for studies to include in a systematic review. And I'm looking today really at drawing some of the key points from the Cochrane Handbook, but in a very much abbreviated way. And we are, as mentioned, going to concentrate mainly on searching for references to include in an intervention review, and we'll briefly touch on how you might develop a risk question as well. You may well be aware that there are lots of different types of systematic review out there now. So things like systematic reviews of diagnostic test accuracy, qualitative evidence syntheses, mixed methods reviews. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in the search process for those, they will be similar to what I'm talking about today, but you might, as well as the Cochrane Handbook, want to look at some of the material coming out of the Cochrane methods groups, who have supplementary searching methods for specific types of review. Also, the Joanna Briggs Institute Manual for Evidence Syntheses has guidance on different types of review and is a very useful resource. For general information on searching, I find this book from LeVay and Craven really useful, giving you practical tips for how to search in a systematic way. So, being mindful of the fact that we've got a very short time to go through the process today, these are kinds of reports and guidance that I would encourage you to look at after the session if you're embarking on a search yourself. And there will be a link to a resource list at the end of the session so that you have links to all the references and websites that I mentioned today. So this is the process that we're going to cover, and we're going to concentrate mostly on steps 1 to 3, but we will talk about grey literature and additional search methods and reporting in a brief way as well. So we're going to start off with a scoping search. Now, I just want to take a moment to distinguish between a scoping search and a scoping review. So a scoping review is a form of evidence synthesis in its own right, and it has its own methodology. And the Joanna Briggs Institute manual does have a chapter on how to conduct a scoping review. What I'm talking here in a scoping search is very brief, quick and dirty searching that we might do at the outset of the project to establish the parameters of what we're looking at. So in quite an informal way, as I've illustrated here, getting a feel for the literature. How much literature is there out on the topic that you're interested in? What kind of literature is there? Are they articles, conference reports, service evaluations, dissertations? So getting a feel for the depth and breadth of the information out there. And the reason we do this is that it helps you to think about what your question is and to set that within the wider literature. It also helps you to identify what kind of review you're going to undertake. Is your question around the effectiveness of an intervention? Are you looking more at maybe the implementation of an intervention? And in that case, the review type that you choose may be slightly different. In the resource list, I've given you a link to a website called Right Review that talks you through the process of selecting the right review type and can help you in really starting to think about what you're doing and what information you need to collect to address that question. Very important at this stage is that we establish that we're not duplicating existing research. We don't want to be embarking on a systematic review that might take you 6, 9, 12 months to complete if there is an existing review out there. So we want to make sure that there's a need for the review that you're undertaking. And very importantly for the search process, at this stage, we want to identify a few key references that we would know that our formal search would need to capture. So it'll help us in developing our set of keywords for our search, but also help us in testing out the performance of our search before we apply it across databases. So quite an informal process, and take time over this. Don't just do it quickly and overlook it. It's worth getting everything right at this stage before you proceed. So the next stage is, once you've scoped out the literature, is to establish what your own question is. And within the Cochrane Handbook, they really emphasize the importance of a well-formulated question, because it will underpin everything that you do. So how you write out your protocol, how you design the search strategy, what inclusion and exclusion criteria you'll apply within Covidence when you're screening your results, but also what you'll then go on to extract from the relevant studies and how you'll structure your conclusions and your results. So it's really important that you develop your question in a structured way. Helpfully, there are question formulation tools that can help with this process, and you might be familiar with some of those I'm displaying on the screen at the moment. A recent review in 2019 established that there were 38 formulation tools at that stage, and I know it's been added to since. But I suppose that PICO and PICOS are the ones that are longest standing and most well known. But just to introduce you a little bit more to these tools, I'll go through them. So PICO was really developed in the late 1980s, early 1990s to try and break down intervention questions, so questions related to the effectiveness of treatment, whether that be therapeutic or preventative. So P stands for the population, sometimes the patient or participant group. Intervention is what we're going to do to that group and what we want to evaluate. Control is what we're comparing, so what we're comparing the intervention to. So another intervention, usual care. And then we have the outcome. So that could be outcomes for the patient, outcome for the service, outcome for the population at large, or for your research project. PCOS is an extension of that, and this is where we identify what type of research will best answer that intervention question. Traditionally, they've been generally restricted to randomized controlled trials, but in some types of intervention, we might consider before and after studies or interrupted time series as well. PECO is similar to the intervention PICO, but it accepts that we don't always have an intervention, particularly when we've got a risk question or a prognostic question, and that's we replace the intervention with an exposure. PERT is one that is very specific to diagnostic tests, but you can see it follows the same structure where we have an index test rather than an intervention, and instead of an outcome, we have a target condition. What are you trying to diagnose? And SPIDER has developed really for qualitative syntheses, for mixed methods reviews that tend to be broader in scope. So we have sample instead of population, phenomenon of interest instead of intervention, and evaluation instead of outcome. So we're going to concentrate on PCOS first of all today. So I'll just demonstrate how I would use it to structure a question and how to use it to develop a search from there. So I've got quite a focus question here. So how does CBT delivered online compared to face-to-face? CBT in people living with insomnia, particularly looking at quality of life. So you can see here I've identified my population as adults with insomnia. So I've been a little bit more specific than in the title of the question. My intervention is online CBT. My control or comparison is face-to-face CBT. And I've got a range of outcomes, so improved sleep, tiredness levels, quality of life, productivity at work. And I'm really wanting to focus on just identifying randomized controlled trials because I am looking at the effectiveness of an intervention. So I've identified that RCTs are the most appropriate study type for me in this case. So now I've structured my PICO, it's really useful for informing the development of my search, but I'm not necessarily going to incorporate each element of the PICO into my search. The aim of designing a search within the context of a systematic review is that we're as comprehensive as possible. What we don't want to do is miss relevant papers. And therefore, we're going to do as broad a search as possible on just the key criteria within our PICO. And generally, for an intervention question, we concentrate on keywords for the population and keywords for the intervention. Particularly in this case, the control is face-to-face CBT, and there really isn't a structured or standardized way of describing face-to-face contact. So it could be face-to-face, it could be in person, it could be traditional, it could be conventional. So in order not to miss any papers, I'm not going to enter the control into my search. So I'm looking at online CBT compared to any other control, whether it be face-to-face CBT or any other treatment. And I'm going to use my control as part of my screening criteria once I've downloaded my references into Covidence. So when I recognize a paper as being about comparison between online CBT and face-to-face, I'm going to include it. If the comparison isn't mentioned in the title and abstract, then it will be excluded. So it's worthwhile having it there, but it won't be incorporated into my search. Similarly, in the case where I have multiple outcomes, I'm not going to put those in the search either. So I will be retrieving papers that have keywords related to insomnia and keywords related to online CBT, so very broad, which means that any kind of control is captured and any kind of outcome is captured. However, I am aware that there are validated search filters for RCTs, and I'm confident that I can apply that filter and make sure that I don't miss any relevant RCTs. So that will be incorporated into my search. So how do I go about designing my search strategy? So it's got different elements. Obviously, I will have done some scoping searching, so I have some insight from there. And part of that process will have been brainstorming the kinds of keywords that authors might have used for the key concepts within their articles. So I'm hoping that they, within the title and abstract, will have described the population and the intervention, and they'll have keywords related to the study type. So I'll do that on my own, but I might also ask colleagues or a fellow librarian for suggestions. If I'm working with a research group, I'll ask the researcher or the students. And if the systematic review is part of a broader project and I'm lucky enough to have a stakeholder group, I might also approach them for keywords and key terms that they might find useful, so that I can incorporate it into my initial search. Increasingly now, we do use text analysis or software to help us develop our search. And one of the ones I'll show you today is something called the Yale Mesh Analyzer. And that allows me to take the baseline set of records that I've identified in my scoping search and see how they're tagged using which mesh headings are used for those papers within PubMed, but also any author keywords that are assigned within PubMed. So again, allowing me not only to search for title and abstract keywords, but also the subject heading or subject tags within the databases. We're very lucky that for certain aspects of the search, we can benefit from the work of previous researchers and previous librarians. The ISSG search filter resource is really useful. It was developed first of all, and I'll just flash it up on the screen here. Developed first when librarians were starting to work on systematic reviews and they wanted reliable search strings, combinations of keywords to retrieve specific types of study. So we started with RCTs, but then spread out to observational studies, diagnostic studies. But you'll see from the left-hand side here that now we have search strings already validated and tested on all kinds of different aspects of our search criteria. So things like adherence, etiology, age groups, we've got geographical, epi studies, intervention studies. So these are filters that we can take from here and bolt onto our search and be confident that they have been tested by other researchers and librarians. And it means that we're less likely to make mistakes within our own searching. Also, a new innovation in the last 12 months or so, we now have something called Search Archive, where researchers and librarians, once they've done their systematic review, are making their search histories available online so that we can benefit of their experience and incorporate those into our searches as well. With both the ISSG search filter resource and search archive, if you are incorporating them into your own searches, then please do make sure that you cite the original so that you can show that you are benefiting from the learned experience of other people. Search archive is quite new. So the other way of doing that is looking at published reviews to see whether the search strategies have been published alongside the review and learning from those as well. So it's quite a messy process at this stage. So we're learning and developing our search from lots of different sources. So I suppose this is an illustration of my initial brainstorming. So I need keywords for the three main concepts So my population, my insomnia, and there are two aspects to my intervention. Yes, it's about CBT, but it also has a digital or online aspect. So you'll see from the keywords here for insomnia, I've got synonyms for sleeplessness, for sleep disorder. For CBT, I've got synonyms for cognitive behavior therapy and the different spellings thereof, mindfulness there as well. And for the digital aspect, I've got digital, I've got internet-based, I've got apps, I've got smartphone. So that was where I was starting off my search. I then went off to Mesh Analyzer, and I'll show you the live version because I think it's a little clearer. And these were some of the key studies that I identified with my scoping search. And the way I search them within here is that they have the PubMed IDs right at the top. And that's how I find the additional data. And it's quite a quick process. You just put the PubMed ID in and it retrieves the records. So here I can see the mesh headings on these 4 papers. And I can also see the author keywords. So what I'm looking out for is consistency between the records. And we can see that when it comes to the intervention, cognitive behavioral therapy is used consistently across the records. When it comes to the digital aspect, one isn't described at all, but on the others, they're slightly different. So I now know that I need to use multiple subject headings or mesh terms, because one is using internet-based intervention as a very specific term. The others are looking at internet more broadly. And then when it comes to insomnia, I don't see anything there related to insomnia, but there is this set of keywords at the bottom relating to sleep. So I need to keep in mind that sleep initiation and maintenance disorders might be useful. I can also learn here. So we've got CBT, we've got CBTI, which is very specific to insomnia, online health, online treatment. So lots of variations to describe my, my different concepts. So once I've done that, I'm at the stage where I can start developing my search live on a database. And it is an iterative process. So I would learn from the brainstorming and from the mesh analyzer, incorporating different terms and testing them out. As a baseline, I want to make sure that they capture the studies I identified in my scoping search. That's a minimum requirement. But I also want to introduce a degree of precision. So I've said that I want my search to be broad and comprehensive, but I don't want to unnecessarily capture irrelevant papers. So I want to make sure that there aren't patterns within the irrelevant papers, that maybe there are things consistently coming up on a subject I'm not interested in. And if I change my keywords, I may be able to exclude those and reduce the number I need to screen. At this stage, I would say once you think you've approached your final version, then an element of peer review is really beneficial. Whether that's informal peer review, so you share it with a colleague or a librarian, and they can check it for accuracy. Are there any typing mistakes? Are there any spelling errors? Have you missed any key subject headings? Are you being too restrictive with your limits? But preferably, there is a peer review tool available now that does this much more rigorously, and it's called the press checklist. So if you have the time, I would strongly encourage you to ask somebody to press your search just to ensure that nothing has been missed from your search. So now I'm going to go out and demonstrate how I would go about starting to develop this search within Medline. And I often use Medline for my search development because it's a database I use mostly. And I am today going to demonstrate Medline via Ovid. You may have access to Medline via EBSCO, or Medline as part of PubMed. And the process is very similar between those databases. So let me just launch the search here now. So I'm going to go into Medline and it will pick up my authentication. Hopefully not take too long. And I'm going to start going through the search concept by concept. So I'll just increase the size of the screen so hopefully you will be able to see it. So the first thing I'm going to do is do my search block for my population. So I'm going to start with insomnia. If you remember from the mesh analyzer, there was this strange sleep initiation and maintenance disorders. So I'm going to double check that that's the correct one for insomnia. So I just type insomnia into the search box and I want to make sure that the map term to subject heading is ticked. And when I click on search, it will go through to the part of the database that relates to the subject term. So when I hit search now, I won't be retrieving articles on the topic. I will be going through to the subject listing. So I click on search. And yes, indeed, it does come up with this strange sleep initiation and maintenance disorders term. If I was still unsure, I would click on the scope note to just verify that this is the term I want to use. And what it's telling me here is that if a paper mentions all these different types of insomnia, that the database will indeed use the subject term sleep initiation and maintenance disorders. So I'm confident now that this is the right subject heading for me to search. I do want to verify there's no more specific term. So I'm going to click on the link and scroll down to the blue line. And what I can see underneath, indented underneath, there is a more specific type of insomnia. Now, if I just search for sleep initiation and maintenance disorders, the 195 papers on fatal familial insomnia will be missed. If I want to include them, I want to explode. So you'll see the column on the right is explode. And that means that I will get all 16,000 records tagged as being about sleep initiation and maintenance disorders, and the 195 that are tagged as fatal familial insomnia. I'm happy with that, but you could choose not to include the narrow term if you think it's appropriate. So I'm going to scroll back to the top, click on continue. And I want to be really broad at this stage, so I'm not going to restrict further. So now I have just short of 17,000 records that are tagged as being about sleep initiation, maintenance disorders, the subject heading for insomnia. However, I'm keen not to miss papers that might not have been tagged yet, or where insomnia is part of the paper and is mentioned by the authors, but it hasn't been tagged as such. So I'm going to make sure that I also capture papers where the authors are mentioned in the title, the abstract, or their author keywords that it's about insomnia. If I want to search generally, I can just do the keyword search, but I want to be quite specific, and I'm going to use a specific syntax. And you can learn about the syntax of the database from the search fields. So we can see that I'm going to use AB if I want to search within the abstract. I'm going to search for KF if I want to search within the author keywords. And I want to search for TI if I want to search within the title. Now I could do it within this search screen, but I prefer to add the syntax in the advanced search. So I'm going to go with insomnia or sleep plus, and I'm going to introduce the asterisk after sleep plus so that I get also sleeplessness. And similarly, after sleep disorder, if I want sleep disorders, I'm going to introduce the asterisk there. I'm grouping those together with the round brackets, and now I'm going to specify that I want the title, the abstract, or the author keywords. So you'll find within Ovid Medline that there's a very specific syntax. Starts with a dot, ends with a full stop, and any fields separated by commas in between. There is a way of doing it within Medline EBSCO and PubMed, which is similar, but the syntax will be slightly different. So I'm going to click on search. So I've now got two searches on the same topic. One is a subject search and two is a title abstract keyword search. I want to see where the intersection is, and I want papers that either tagged with sleep maintenance disorders or that have the keywords in the title abstract. And what I want to do now is put these two together. And because they're synonymous, I'm always going to use or. We always use or to combine search terms or keywords for the same thing. So I've got my master sets for sleeplessness now. I'm going to introduce my CBT aspect. So from the mesh analyzer, it was cognitive behavioral therapy, but if I want to confirm it, again, I use the mapping function here. And indeed, it is cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm confident with that, but I want to see if there are any narrower terms. So there are three narrower terms indented underneath. So acceptance and commitment therapy, cognitive restructuring, and mindfulness. If I wanted to include all three of those alongside cognitive behavioral therapy, I would explode. But I'm actually only interested in mindfulness. I'm not interested in the other two. So I'm going to select cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness rather than exploding. And I'm going to click on continue. And then I'll repeat the process with my title abstract keyword search. So this is an interesting thing to say about cognitive behavior therapy, is that there are multiple ways of spelling it. So it could be cognitive behavior therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, but we also have both the American and the UK spellings of behavior, behavioral. And I can use the asterisk here within a word. So I'm going to use the asterisk after behave so that I get the different combinations. I will also use the acronym. Sometimes you do have to be careful with acronyms if they're used for more than one different type of terminology. And again, I'll put the syntax in for title, abstract, and author keyword, and click on search. Whenever I put the syntax in or have ORs within my setting, it overrides the mapping. So I'm now going to create my master sets for CBT. So all those two together. I'll expand my search so that I can see everything. So now I've got two sets here. I've got my insomnia set, which is number 3, my CBT set that is number 6. If I want to see the cross section and to narrow down the results, I would just click on and. So select the two master sets and click on the and button. And I have just over 2,500. However, I have 2 extra elements to add into my search to restrict it further. So I would be wanting to add in my digital components, and I would want to add in my RCT filter as well. However, because we're short of time today, I'm not going to demonstrate that aspect, but I'm going to show you what it would look like when I'd completed it. So this search here is maybe the search that I would send to a colleague, to fellow researchers, so that they could comment on how it was developing and whether they had any suggestions on how we could change it. Here I have my completed search. So I'll just increase the size again so that you can see everything. So you'll see in this example, I slightly amended my insomnia terms. So I've added sleep-wake disorders as being relevant and identified by one of my researchers. And I've broadened the relationship for sleep disorders. If I type sleep disorders into Ovid Medline and they appear next to each other, they will be searched as a phrase. If I want maybe disordered sleep, sleep disordered, sleep-wake disorders, where the terms are not next to each other in that order, then I can introduce proximity searching here. So we're saying I want anything related to sleep, ADJ3, within 3 words of disorder. So I've got a master set number 4. I then have my CBT set. And then my digital set, you'll see, is very long and looks very complicated. Now, I can't take any credit for this, so I took this from the ISSG search filter repository, and it's one developed by the information specialists at NICE for identifying health apps. And it seemed to match really well with the meaning of digital for the research group I was looking at. The only amendments I made was to add keywords at the top related to remote consultation. So when I added that to my CBT and insomnia terms, reducing it then from about 2000 to 508 when we had added the digital components. And I also benefited from work that was included in the ISSG resource filter support, and this is the RCT filter included in the Cochrane handbook. And I never make changes to this filter because it has been validated as it is. So don't worry that there may be words in there that are not relevant, or you might want an alternative spelling. It has been validated in this exact form as being highly sensitive for identifying RCTs. And part of it is excluding animal studies. So when I apply that to my main subject search, I go down from 508 to 349, and that is the total that I would export into Covidence for screening. So a really quick whiz through the search there. I just want to show you another quick example of how we might develop a risk question, and you'll see that the process is exactly the same. So I've broken down this example here, and I've got an exposure instead of an intervention. And I've still got my study type, but I've amended that because my researchers have recognized that observational studies are more likely to answer this question, so cohorts, case control, rather than an RCT. I've broken down my search in a similar way, but in this case, I haven't searched on population and intervention. What I've gone with is my exposure, because there's no reliable way that we can search for adults. It's not a sufficiently discriminatory term. And we've also going to search based on the outcome. And we do have reliable study filters for observational studies, so I will be using those. And I go through the same process. So I brainstorm my keywords related to the shift working, related to the outcome of obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. I run the key studies through the Yale Mesh Analyzer, and it gives me suggestions around mesh terms for cardiometabolic risk factors, cardiovascular diseases, metabolic syndrome. Also suggests things like follow-up studies, cohort studies as study types. And I come up with a very similar search process. So you'll see that the search strategy looks almost the same in that we have a group of terms that describes my shift working. So the top term is the mesh term, shift work schedule. And then we have title abstract keyword searches for shift working, night shifts, irregular shifts. Similarly, mesh terms and title abstract keyword terms for my outcomes of obesity, cardiovascular disease, metabolic diseases. And finally, I've got a set of terms for my observational studies. And this time I've taken these again from the ISSG search filter resource. And this is a search filter developed and validated by the SIGN group up in Scotland. And I bring all components together and I have 889 that I would then export into Covidence. So that's a demonstration of how I would develop a search on Medline. My next stage would be to think about where else I'm going to search and what adjustments I'm going to need to the searches across different databases. So for a systematic review, you need a minimum of 2 databases, and Medline and Embase are the most commonly used as general healthcare databases. For an intervention question, I would add Central as the main repository of controlled trials. If I was running that insomnia search, looking at online CBT, I would definitely add PsycInfo as being the main database looking at psychology, psychiatry. But in some cases, I not only need to add in subject-specific database, I might add in geographically specific databases. So Medline and Embase overwhelmingly includes research from the larger developed countries. And if I want to make sure I'm not missing research published in the global south, then I would add LILACs for South America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. African Index Medicus is self-explanatory. And then the citation indexes as well. Adapting the searches for the individual databases can be tricky. We have got a tool now called Polyglots that helps with that adaptation. It's not foolproof, but it can make the process much more streamlined. Once we've searched for and exported all our references from the databases, which are mainly going to be article records, but sometimes, as for in Embase, you'll get conference abstracts. But we really need to think about what kind of grey literature we're including, if we are going to include it. And grey literature stands for any type of unpublished material, things that are not published commercially. So conference abstracts that appear in just in proceedings, trial registrations, preprints, so pre-peer reviewed articles, theses and dissertations and reports. And I'm not saying that you would search for all of these for every type of review, but you'd identify which are key to your question. So for an intervention review, we always search for trial registrations to pick up anything that hasn't been published yet. So where do you find them? So there are specific resources, and they're all going to be in the resource list. So things like clinicaltrials.gov and WHO, ICTRP for trial registers. MedArchive is the main medical preprint archive, but I find that Europe PubMed Central integrates lots of different preprint archives and can be a more efficient way of searching. And you might do some web searching, some direct contact with authors or organizations for things like service evaluations, working papers, if it's relevant to your review, often done with mixed methods reviews, realist reviews. We also want to make sure we haven't missed anything, and this is where snowballing or citation tracking comes in. So backward citation tracking is which references have been included in the studies that you've identified as key. Forward citation tracking is who might have cited those key articles subsequently. You have similar article linking that uses algorithms within databases, particularly PubMed and Google Scholar, to link subject articles. And you might also use author linking links within some of the databases if you've identified a key author within a subject. And there are lots of ways that you can do this. So I find Citation Chaser is really good for backward and forward citation tracking, especially when you then want to import the results into Covidence. But you can do it on things like Web of Science and Scopus as well. Google Scholar can be used for forward citation and related article linking. And you can either use integrated links within databases for author linking, or you might want to contact authors directly. So that's a bit of the messier part of the search. So I'll hand over to Gida just before we finish now to talk about importing all these references that you're collecting.
Thank you, Nia. So references can be imported into Covidence from a number of sources and databases that just Nia went through. And to import these into Covidence, you need to be able to export them in a formats that we currently support. And there's 3 formats for file imports that Covidence supports. It's either the EndNote XML format, PubMed text format, which is directly exporting this from a format that is available in PubMed database itself, or RIS text formats. And if you have resources similar to grey literature and they are in a different format, then we recommend to manually enter these into a reference manager. And here I have a list of the most commonly used reference managers like EndNote, Zotero, RefWorks, and to export these as a Covidence accepted format. And we have here in the slide as well a resource from our Covidence knowledge base on how to import the references after you've exported them from your databases into Covidence as well. Thank you, Nia.
So just one last slide for me. So it is really important to report your search methods in full, both your searches of bibliographic databases, your grey literature searches, and the more informal additional search steps. And Prisma S is the extension to Prisma 2020 that deals with the reporting of the search process. And I would strongly encourage you to read this before you embark on your searches so you know what data you need to collect along the way. You can't retrofit this data, you need to preserve it as you're running your searches and going through the process. So you'd be expected to summarize your methods in the main report, so in your main article. So you need details around where you search, which database platform you use, the dates of the search, which keywords you used, whether you used study filters, whether you used other people's searches and you need to reference and cite those. And also, did you do any of that citation tracking, looking for grey literature? All of that would be summarized in the main report. The numbers retrieved at each stage, which would be reported in the Prisma 2020 flowchart. And the full strategies for each of the databases you searched, the keywords you might have used on specific things like trial registers and websites would then be reported in the appendices. So double check with Prisma 2020 and Prisma S for really details of what you need to record and report. So now we're at time for questions. So were anything raised in the Q&A or the chat that you'd like me to address, or will you want to address?
Yeah, thank you, Nia. We actually have just 2 questions related to the more about the abbreviations of. There's a question about what is FS, what .fs means.
So .fs wasn't one of the ones that I used today. So I used .ti, .ab, and .kf. So TI is title, AB is KF, abstract, and KF is keyword. So I think FS is what you're referring to from the fully developed search, and it's something called a floating subheading. And you'll see it in the list of results here. So now they've changed the syntax. So, oh no, here's floating subheading. And I'll show you quickly here what a floating subheading is. It's not obvious. So it's related to the mesh terms. So I'll go into the mesh search. If I search for cognitive behavioral therapy here, I can decide to make my search more specific by assigning a subheading to it. So if I wanted papers on CBT and only wanted ethics papers, then I would restrict here to the subheading ethics. However, I can search for the ethics subheading on its own. And that is what the floating subheading, or FS, is referring to. So that would be searching for ethics as a subheading, but without needing to define which mesh term it's assigned to. So they use it as part of the RCT filter, because what they realize that traditionally with RCTs, many of them were tagged with drug therapy, which is a subheading, rather than being tagged with a mesh term. So they incorporated this floating subheading into the trial filter. So I hope that it is quite a technical issue. So I hope that explains it.
Sure, thanks. And there was also a question that's very important. Should we always include the outcome in our search strategy? I was once told it could be problematic in a search.
Yeah, so it can be problematic, and that's why I didn't include the outcome in our intervention question. If we look here for the intervention question, I just included the population and the intervention. However, with risk questions, it is more common to include the outcome, because it really is the exposure and the outcome, the risk of what, that is relevant. So in that case, we would identify the outcome, because generally we don't have a population to link our search to. So it certainly, we make the decision based on each individual question as to what is most effective, most comprehensive, but also with a degree of precision, whether we include our outcomes or not. But generally not for intervention questions, more common for risk or exposure questions.
Thank you, Nia. I'm just gonna also, there's a question about the TW instead of, what would you consider using TW instead of TI and AB?
So on Medline, TW corresponds to TI-AB, but it wouldn't incorporate that KF element, the author keyword element. So you need to be aware that yes, it will pick up terms in title and abstract, but not from the author keywords if you use the TW. If you think it's appropriate, then it's fine to use TW, because it will pick up keywords in title and abstract.
Thank you,
But
Nia. Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, yes,
but
sorry,
it
go
is
ahead.
database specific. So if we looked at TW, for example, on PubMed, it has a slightly different meaning in that it does also include the mesh terms there, I think. So it's not consistent between databases necessarily. So double check what it means on the database you're searching.
Yeah, there's actually a few questions about the availability. Let's say there was a question about TI-ABKF filter if it's available as well and used in PubMed databases.
So yes, you can use them in PubMed, and I'll just show you quickly how you would access that information. So from PubMed, I would tend to do a systematic review search in the advanced search, and you'll see that the fields are in the drop-down menu here. So the way you would search for it is that you would take the text word or the title abstract from the drop-down menu and then type in your search terms separated by OR. But there are differences between PubMed and Medline via Ovid. So, and that is a whole different seminar. Because although they include the same database, there are substantial differences in how they interpret your search terms. I think in our resource list, we have put links through to Carrie Price's YouTube channel, and she does 5-minute Friday videos. And I think one of the videos she has is on the differences between, or what you need to know about searching PubMed. So I would look at Carrie's videos for that information.
Great, thanks, Nia. So the resources that we want to share, are they part of this slide deck, or is it a separate document, just so that I'm clear?
So the link will go through to the Google Deck from this slide that will be shared with everybody. So you should be able to just click on the link and it will open up the resource list in Google for you.
Wonderful. That's going to be really, really useful. So earlier in the session, I posted to the chat to let everybody know that the slides for this webinar are going to be available in the coming days on the Covidence knowledge base, and I've included a URL there. So give us 24 hours or so to actually upload those, but they'll be available for you to view. And there's an awful lot of information there. Thank you so much to Nia for your time today. This is a really complex area, and we're so grateful to you for walking us through and really giving us an insight into how these things are set up. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Gida. And thank you everybody else who's taken the time to tune in today. You will all receive a recording of this webinar. Anybody who's registered will receive a recording of this session within 24 hours of it concluding today. So I think that's all we've got time for. Gida, did you want to add anything just before we wrap up?
No, thank you so much, Nia and Laura, for the amazing presentation today. And just for our user community, if you need to find out more about our upcoming webinars, please follow us on Twitter as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Gida, for that. All right. Well, yeah, thanks again to everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.